Joining me now is Dan Barber. Time for something a little bit different. We're going to discuss Dan's favourite moments of the Christmas racing period. Dan, very good to have you on. Hope you're feeling Christmassy.
Yeah, one of the favourite moments wouldn't have been my huge face looming over your shoulder just then, Tom. But thankfully, I'm envisioned now properly.
Absolutely. We're going to go on to one of your favourite Christmas races to start off with, and I know that you've always been a huge fan of the King George, and it's delivered some mighty performances down the years, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has, and without wanting to be a complete company man, I do think one of the joys when we're all scrambling around on, say, Christmas Eve or the 23rd for something to do, sporting-wise, because so much of it isn't on, is to watch the racing TV feed with all the King George memories. I mean, that applies to all big races. We do the lead up and we'll do a bit of a feature with 6 or 7 renewals, and it will be the same in the lead up to Kempton on Boxing Day. And it does just make you reminisce. It makes you nostalgic, but it gives you a real boost, I think, as well. Just great memories down the years of great horses, and that thing that is the first attachment to the sport, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Dan, I have to say. And I think only true racing fans really enjoy sitting down and watching those memories, but I'm very much with you on that. One of the finest climaxes to the King George in the last few years was most certainly Q Card against Vautour, wasn't it? And of course, in terms of sort of cacophonous roars, it didn't get much louder than that day at Kempton, did it?
Well, I wasn't there, unfortunately. Well, you could get that sense off the television. But there's another dynamic to this race that's probably never really mentioned. We always mention the fact that Q Card gets up late to outstay Vautour, probably. But we also lose a Gold Cup winner at this point as Don Cossack gets the second last wrong and comes down. And I think, given what we know about Don Cossack, what we knew a bit before and certainly what we knew subsequently, I think he was the moral winner of the King George more than Vautour, because he'd have stayed on at least as powerfully as Q Card. But it's left to the two of them. Neither are great at the last. It looks for all the world like Vautour's doing just enough. The gap is not closing until, say, inside the final 75 yards. And then Q Card gets up late. You can give the impression of being a really dedicated and committed family man, I think, within racing, when you can cite, oh, I remember where we were when on this day last year, and it's almost always born out of you remember where you were watching a race. You remember absolutely nothing to do with the occasion you were at with the family. And I can cite this one back. It's one of those examples where I'll say, oh, do you know where we were a year ago? And they'll say, no, not a clue. I can impress with my knowledge, and it's purely the source of that is just because I recall watching a race in a particular place.
Yeah, I think the King George is always a good marker for where you were, isn't it? A nice memory of Boxing Day. And it's interesting what you were saying to me earlier about Teeton Mill off air, because obviously one of Venetia's finest racehorses ever, and I was going back through his career, and actually it wasn't just the King George, was it? He was a hugely talented chaser. We're going back a long time ago now, 1998, but he was a marvellous horse, and he won a couple of Grade Ones, he won a Hennessy, he had it all really, didn't he?
Yeah, and he came from a route that you probably don't see so much anymore. I'd say Kingscliff was the only one since that fit the same mould as being from the Hunter Chase ranks and pointing and just progressing to become the leading light in the Stay and Chase division. Now, he never got to win a Gold Cup. You can see horse in second going back. I'm pretty sure that's Escata Figue. He was a very good novice the previous season. So this was just, don't anybody be of the impression that Venetia's some sort of late to the party trainer. She's been doing this with these mud-loving horses in staying chases for decades now, and this at the time was one of my very favourites. And it tees up, doesn't it, the potential image of what we might see this Boxing Day, because I'm as bad as anybody for the, oh, well, this horse is £5 better off for a length, that sort of side of racing, but I do think there's something beautiful about the aesthetics of a bold jumping grey horse, I suppose particularly at this time of year, just attacking fences. We've seen it with One Man, we saw it with Desert Orchid, we saw it with Teeton Mill under Storming Norman, and we may be seeing it with Grey Dawn in a few days' time.
Yeah, absolutely lovely scenes there as well with Venetia Williams, the young Venetia Williams, congratulating all connections concerned with Teeton Mill, and it's always a race that I've been hugely fond of, not just because you often get horses like Teeton Mill, like Kicking King, like Coulter Style go and win easily, but you also get, as we saw with Q Card and Vautour, and Captain Chris a long run, really close finishes too, so it's got a bit of everything. You mentioned this year's race, Dan, and Grey Dawning must have a decent chance. Hopefully we'll see him line up there, and he's a horse I think has got plenty of attributes necessary to win a race like the King George. Yeah,
absolutely. This, for me, was the Novice. It wasn't the highest rated performance from a Novice last season. That was Gaelic Warriors routing the Arkle. But I thought the spectacle of this trumped even Gaelic Warriors. It was the fact that I had a great vantage point up in the stands. I think I'd finished the morning shift and I had the chance to stay around and watch a few races. It was just the fact that they were going hell for leather from so far out to real warrior horses. The jump in between the two, I mean, Race IQ data didn't double check what it said, but they'd have probably been in double digits over the field. They were pinging everything, they were brave as you like, and a properly run race really did sort the wheat from the chaff. I mean, there were only 3 or 4 could win it from a long way out just because the others couldn't cope with the spectacle. And this is the question that we got to pose now for Boxing Day. Great work, I think, from Dan to realise that after initially saying on the back of a hard race in the Betfair, well, we're going to sit off him now and give him a bit of time to recover. But he doesn't let opportunities pass, does he, Dan, when there's a chance there that presents itself. And I think in a lessened King George this time around, he does have a very leading chance. Indeed, I think he's a deserving favourite and maybe should be a bit shorter. But put simply, I think he's the best British trained staying chaser. I think he'll prove to be so. And I thought for so much of the Haydock race, he was in the process of proving himself so as well. It was just a mistake at the worst time that prevented him from holding Royal Pagano. I'm sure without that error, Tom, he would have held him. And that would have been holding a horse who is absolutely in his element, Haydock testing ground. That would have been a fair notch on the bedpost. And I'm looking forward to seeing him ping those fences down the back at Kempton and confirm himself the great almost white hope of the British staying chase scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if Grey Dawning does win, Dan, we're sort of harking back, aren't we, to the gallant, galloping greys of old. I know that you're a fan of both Desert Orchid and One Man. We're going to take a look at both their wins in the King George. How would you compare Grey Dawning to first Desert Orchid and what you've seen so far? Clearly, he has a lot to do to get to the heights that Desert Orchid achieved. But given that, you know, and he's in his early days as a chaser, how do you think he compares so far?
Yeah, I think we would have to rein ourselves in when it comes to comparisons beyond the colour. Dan Skelton's a very bold campaigner, but had absolutely nothing on what David Ellsworth used to do with Desert Orchid. And this was basically slightly before my time, but he would have been one of the very first horses that I was aware of just from watching King George's at my grandparents' house and my brother and uncle being so obsessed with the sport at that time. This is a horse who was winning Whitbreads under top weight and Irish Nationals. It wouldn't happen in this day and age. That said, I mean, the entry class divide being such nowadays that maybe you would see a Gold Cup horse. We'd be as close now as we have been since to a horse that wins a Gold Cup going for a Grand National. But here's One Man, another absolute star. I always hark back, less so his performances in winning races like the King George. And I always think back to that Champion Chase that he won as well, because he had a history, didn't he, of getting to Cheltenham for the Gold Cup and cutting out between the last two as his stamina gave way. But he was lethal at Kempton on Boxing Day, but he was particularly lethal that day. They stepped him right back down in trip for the Queen Mother, and Brian Harding was deputising for Tony Dobbin that day. And I still see Brian regularly on the Northern scene. He works the BHA now as a jockey coach, and I'll often introduce him if people don't know him as the one who got a Cheltenham Festival win out of the great One Man in open company.
Yeah, some horse he was, One Man, it has to be said, and the only horse to win 2 King Georges in the same year, so that's quite a feather in his cap, that's for sure. Let's move on, Dan, shall we, to another race on Boxing Day, another Grade 1, and this is the Christmas Hurdle. We're going to talk about Constitution Hill. I don't know about you, I'm a little bit weary now of the will he, won't he be the same as he's always been. I think it's time we get some answers.
Yeah, I think it's got boring. I don't mind saying that. However many printouts we see of statements, it's great for the transparency, but we just want to see him run, don't we? We've seen him, 8 times in his career. there is a danger that we reflect back on, I think, one of the best horses I've ever seen, and I don't exaggerate there. I think what he did to John Bonnetel in a Supreme and what he did to Stateman in a Champion Hurdle was that of a very rare horse indeed. But John Bon ran basically that many times in a season almost as Constitution Hill has managed in his career because of these ailments that he's had and little setbacks here and there. The last twice we've seen him moving, effectively, it was in two pieces of televised work that were far from spectacular. But as they say in boxing, the time for talking is over, and we'll get to see if he still got it. And if he still got it, it's a frightening prospect for the others in that division. And if he hasn't, it makes that division even more wide open. But finally, we get to see him. And I think as much as anything, from a public perspective, to get him back into the public conscience in a positive mood, because I think people are sort of weary, as you say, Tom, of the will he appear? Is he as good as he was? Now we finally get to see him back on track. And that's all I want to see. I want to see the best horses running. And you think back to his days as a novice, there was that chance to run against Honeysuckle maybe at Punchestown. Could have done historic things in winning a Betfair Hurdle under a massive weight, but we just hope he can build back up to things like that now, because what a special racehorse he has been on his day. And if that's still in there, then he will light up Boxing Day, even if the King George can't manage it.
Yeah, and positive signs from Nicky Henderson this morning. You said to Nick Luck on his podcast that Nicky couldn't be happier with Constitution Hill at the moment. In my heart of hearts, in my gut, I always think it's really difficult for these top-class horses to come back from a hiatus and absence of this nature. But we have seen Nicky Henderson do it with Sprinter Sacre, haven't we? Bringing him right back to his very best. And hopefully, I think every racing fan would love to see Constitution Hill back to his very best on Boxing Day. That is for sure. Dan, let's move on, shall we, to what is a pretty exciting picture, I think, over the next few weeks and months. And that is the 2-mile novice chase picture, because it looks very competitive. And there's a couple of horses in there at the moment who have got decent form so far, with the potential for plenty more. At the moment, it's shaping up to be a fiendish sort of division.
Yeah, let's applaud the BHA first off for making a change, which it might not be that popular with trainers because they now can't handpick another Cheltenham opportunity for their good horses. But if racing fans can't welcome it, then I'm not sure what sort of position we're in. And that was a decision to turn the Turners into a handicap and leave this incredible lineup potentially for the Arkle, which is a novice chase, I think, that gets everybody excited anyway. It may not be a rich source of future Gold Cup horses, which is the pinnacle of the sport, but it's fast and furious. It's all about pace and an ability to jump at pace. And the list in the anti-post markets is hair on the back of your neck stuff. It really is. We've just got a clutch of horses that could have gone to a Turners in a different year. I'd say Ballyburn would have been an example, given he won the Turners Novice Hurdle as it is now last season over that sort of trip. Madgeborough could have been looking to go that way. But as it is, they're being forced into the shorter distance race. And I just think it's going to make for probably the highlight of the entire meeting. And if it works, whisper it, but will we be in the realms of looking to carve away another race or two to ensure that we get clashes that really do excite people? And how can this not, when you've removed the imponderable of, oh, well, Willie's got 12 in the race, 4 of them could go for the middle distance race. Now almost you're pretty confident where you stand, and it actually makes anti-post betting preferable as well, because you do have that greater degree of confidence into the targets that they might have.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. I agree with you in the fact that I think it could well turn into a proper barnstormer of a race at the Cheltenham Festival. And as you say, the reason that they got rid of the Turners as a Grade 1 race is to make these kind of contests more exciting. And I think we've got exactly that, hopefully, with that 2-mile Arkle. I know that you're a keen follower of racing around the Christmas period in relation to what we might see at the Cheltenham Festival, because we've seen plenty of times in the past, haven't we, Dan, over the next kind of couple of weeks or so, there will be loads of pointers as regards the festival in March.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're on the subject of praising the BHA, I think even the cross-country chase is one where it's going to lead to a more interesting race, isn't it, at the festival when it remains as a handicap. We've got the prospect of numerous Cheltenham Festival winners will be in action. That's just the case. And we need to appreciate it for what it is. We've got tremendous meeting at Leopardstown over a period of days. We've got a tremendous day at Kempton. So we need to enjoy them for what they are, but we need to be mindful as well that whilst Cheltenham is so much of a focus for the sport, it pins so much on it, there will be loads of horses running over the Christmas period, win or lose, who will come back and win the graded races at the festival. I counted 9 graded prizes at the latest Cheltenham Festival. Went to horses that have been in action over Christmas. That could have been a horse like Ballyburn who won a maiden hurdle, Factor Fire won a maiden chase. It could be a horse as good as Galopin de Champs winning the Savills, or it could be a horse like Captain Guinness who didn't even complete in his race. He pulled up over Christmas. So it's a massive tell for what's likely to come at the end of the season or towards the end of the season in handing out those big prizes in the spring.
Yes, absolutely right, Dan. So often it's been a huge portend as to what might come at the Cheltenham Festival. Dan, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much for coming on. Looking forward to seeing you on Sunday at Fakenham for the final meeting before Christmas Day. And I'm sure we'll both be feeling pretty festive then too.
Yeah, I'll see you there, Mr. Partridge.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.